Good morning. I'm Pastor Mike. We're continuing through the book of Genesis. And again, this is an overview, so we're not going into details. We're not covering the little things or the minutia. We're kind of hitting the big things. So we've hit creation, we've hit the fall, we tapped on the flood, and then we worked through the Tower of Babel yesterday. Today, we're just going to be talking about Abraham through Jacob, all in under 10 minutes. So that's the goal. We need to remember some of the big things that we've already learned because they all connect together here in the book of Genesis. In the fall, God makes a promise, a huge promise. In chapter 3, verse 15, he tells us that there is one who is coming who will crush the power of the enemy, the power of Satan. And in the one who is coming, all the consequences of the sin that we created are going to be handled, conquered, and dealt with. The flood gives us a picture of God being both just and merciful. He judges sin, but he also saves those who believe. It is a picture of God's redeeming power. At the Tower of Babel, the whole world changes as new languages are given and the nations are made. Nations filled with people that God still loves. So even though they were punished and scattered, God still loves his world and he loves the people who are in the world. At this point, at the end of Genesis 11, what is God going to do? How is he going to fulfill this promise? Would he simply distance himself from a sinful world? Would he again judge the world in some way, as it appears very few are still worshiping him? How will God fulfill this promise that he made to Adam and Eve? In a very quiet and unexpected way, God calls on a man named Abram, and he proclaims to Abram that it's through him that God's promise would be ultimately fulfilled. In God's call of Abram, we are given a clear picture of the content and the nature of God's promise. The seed that was planted in 3:15 begins to grow. Leaves are starting to form. Clarity is being given of what is going to happen and what the content of this promise will really be. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, God makes a covenant with Abraham. That is, he makes a promise with Abraham to both Abraham and his descendants. Let's read God's first interaction with Abraham. We'll read these 3 verses. Abram, who later is called Abraham, receives these words from the Lord. And as we are given these promises, we'll stop at each one and talk about what we learn from them. Genesis 12:1 says, "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you.'" So first, we see that God promises Abraham that he's going to have a ton of people. They're going to become a part of a nation that is his. So God's going to have to multiply the descendants of Abraham. Next promise, "I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about Abraham. God has certainly fulfilled his promise. God goes on to promise, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." Many of the books, the prophetic books, the major and minor prophets point to this reality. The book of Obadiah, Amos, Micah, and Nahum, just to name a few. The content in those books, in part, are about God cursing and judging nations that don't treat Israel well. God upholds that promise. The final promise given is this one. He says, "And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." All people, so not just the nation that's going to be made through Abraham, but all nations, those who are scattered all over the world, who have repopulated and filled the world, those people will be blessed through Abraham. So even though the people have been scattered across the face of the earth, it is God's intention that through Abraham, that is through his descendants, that all nations would actually be blessed. So what we see here is that Abraham has a child named Isaac. Isaac has a child named Jacob. And with each one of these generations, God reiterates this promise. He doesn't want it to be forgotten. He wants it to be out in front of them, reminding them the importance and significance of this promise. So God tells Isaac in Genesis 26:4, "I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven. I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants, all nations of the earth shall be blessed." God appears to Jacob in a dream, and he says in Genesis 28:14, "And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed." Generation after generation, God reiterates this promise. He doesn't want any generation to forget his commitment to blessing all nations through the people of God, through the Israelites. So God keeps his promise on the forefront of his minds. He shows its importance through repetition. Now, as God fulfills these promises, it takes several generations for God to make Abraham into a mighty nation. It takes even more generations to get the nation of Israel into that promised land. The promise made to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to bless all nations, that promise is still being fulfilled today. We're still in the middle of watching that happen. It is through the church. It is through God's chosen people that the promise will be fulfilled. It is through you and I that this promise will be fulfilled. God is taking the good news of Jesus to all people and all nations that they may believe, receive, and be blessed. When you read the story of Genesis, chapter 12, when you study the covenant made between God and Abraham, you are a part of that story. I'm a part of that story. This church is a part of that story. How often do you think about all nations knowing Jesus and that you get to play a part in that? How often do you think about your neighbor knowing Jesus and that is a part of the fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham? God fulfills his promise to Abraham through Jesus. And Jesus puts us on mission to take this blessing of knowing him to all people, to all nations. Today, I want to challenge you with this mission. Whether you know it or not, whether you live this way or not, you are a missionary of Jesus. You represent and reflect him in your world, in the lives of the people that you are a part of. You just do. Every day, you're a missionary. You are an everyday missionary. God has given you a unique group of people that you have influence with, that you have relationships with, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. I want you to start living your life, and this challenge goes to me as well. Start living your life intentionally as an everyday missionary in that circle of influence. I'm going to say it again. Start living your life with intentionality as an everyday missionary in your circle of influence. I want you to spend time with people. I want you to pray for those people. Invite them into your home. Invite them into your life. Get into spiritual conversations with them. Have conversations that matter. Their trajectory for eternity might be partly based on that. You are an everyday missionary. You are a part of the promise that God made to Abraham. Because Jesus came and died on the cross, we have a message that all nations need to hear. Thank you again for jumping in with us and walking through the book of Genesis. Tomorrow, Matt finishes us up with the story of Joseph. Take care. We'll see you then.